Hey YouTube, my name is Marco and this is YouTube Gaming Education. Today we are going to talk about the Pegi rating. Yep, you heard me. We're going to talk about the one number every kid hates. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So see you in a second. As I said before, I'm going to be talking about the Pegi rating. Those of you who don't know what that is, it's the European age rating for games. It consists of a number that tells us how old an audience the game is meant for and some kind of depiction that tells us what kind of content there is in the game. Don't worry about the depictions, I'll be going over them later. I'm probably going to piss off a lot of gamers with what I'm going to say next because I got kind of a love-hate relationship to the Pegi ratings. You can find one game that's really perfect. You can't really find anything offensive, you can't find any bad language, there may be a bit of violence, but that's in every game. So really great game, you would say it wouldn't have that high a Pegi rating, and for some reason it's rated 18+. And you're like, what the? Wow. And you can find other games where the Pegi rating is just spot on, where it literally depicts everything that's wrong with the game for kids, and it's just great. So if someone came up to me today and asked me would I want to completely delete the Pegi rating because it ain't always useful, I would actually say no. It needs to stay, but it definitely needs a reform so we can actually trust the Pegi rating again instead of guessing with some of them. I promised I would go through the different depictions and warnings that Pegi uses to tell us what kind of content that they may find inappropriate for kids below the certain age rating. So here it goes. First up, we have a classic. This little fella means there's violence in the game. And while it was once a really useful Pegi rating, now it's simply become all too common because it's almost impossible to find a game without some kind of violence in it, which would give it a violence rating. So this Pegi mark, while it was useful once, parents can't really use it that much anymore to decide whether or not the game is something for their children. Then we have another classic one. This fella means bad language, and it's used whenever there is some kind of language that may be inappropriate or offensive for kids. And while this is also a really useful Pegi marking, it's simply used a bit too often. It's one of those they use rather to use it than not to use it. So some games where you can only find like one reference that maybe inappropriate for kids, they get the bad language. So this is a semi-usable rating for parents. It is still usable because sometimes it's right on the spot, but sometimes it's simply wrong. And then we have this little fella, the depiction of a spider. This thing stands for fear and is the steady companion of a horror game. As a Pegi rating, it's actually useful because it ain't overly used. So if you're a parent to small kids and out to buy a game, look out for the spider. It's not something you want for kids that's easily scared. Then we have this little fella. This thing means there's either nudity or sexual content in the game, so it could actually be really useful. But sadly, it has been a little overused, so it's really hard for parents to make out which games would actually be inappropriate for their little kids to play, and which just have one picture somewhere. So as a Pegi rating, it ain't worth that much, but it still has some saying. And of course we have this handy little fella. This mark is used whenever there's drugs, references to drugs, or something that shows approval to drugs in a game. This thing is actually still really handy since it hasn't been overly used. So if you see this on a game, you can be pretty damn sure there's drugs in it. So as a rating for parents, you can definitely still use this mark and the Pegi rating. Then we have this little fella, and I actually hated this Pegi mark when I was a kid because I didn't understand it. It really confused me. It took me really long time, far longer than I'd like to admit, to actually figure out this thing means discrimination. If you see this Pegi mark, it means the game either has discriminating content or it shows content that approves of discrimination. This Pegi rating is also kind of rarely used, so it is still a good one for parents to go and look after if they're buying a game for their kids. And then we have this funny looking fella. Who doesn't just love to roll the dice when gaming and take a chance? Sadly though, that ain't what this thing means. This thing means gambling. And it means there's either content that approves of gambling, where they actually gamble, or even teaches gambling. As a Pegi rating, this thing is decent. It isn't overly used, but I have sometimes seen it on games where you only play like one game of card and you actually don't bet anything. So it isn't the best Pegi rating, but it's far, far, far from the worst. You can still use it as a parent when picking out a game for your kid. And last and definitely least, we have this guy. It means there is an online mode in the game. And why this thing qualifies as a Pegi mark, nobody really knows. Because it ain't the online feature in itself that's offensive or hurts small children. It's the people who are actually online. But I guess that was all I had for you today. It's been a great pleasure. Please go down in the comments and give me your opinions. I guess I'll join you later. See ya!